Good morning on Tuesday, December 12th. It's episode 331 of the 359 podcast. I'm BVG, and your hosts today are Joan E. Solsman and Ben Fox Rubin.
Hello, hello.
Hola.
Hey,
Hello,
Joan.
everyone.
Thanks
Hi.
for coming on.
Yeah, it's always great to come.
So we're going to be talking about net neutrality yet again. This will be in the run-up for the Thursday vote from the FCC, which is the expected repeal of net neutrality. There have been a couple protest efforts this week, which we'll run through. Also, on the gadget side, we'll talk about the review of the Google Home Max and also talk about Apple again with the purchase of Shazam, which was confirmed and announced yesterday. So I think that's about it. Let's get to the podcast. Send in your questions and comments. BVG will get to as many as he can at the end of the show. And let's get started.
There will be plenty to talk about.
There certainly will be.
All right, everybody, stick around. Here comes 4 minutes of headlines for you, starting in 3, 2.
Welcome to the 359. I'm Ben Fox Rubin.
I'm Joan E. Solsman.
The FCC is scheduled to vote on repealing net neutrality rules this Thursday, but many prominent internet players are protesting the move. Activists and websites Mozilla, Pinterest, Reddit, GitHub, Etsy, and BitTorrent are campaigning today against the decision, plus a handful of internet pioneers posted an open letter on Tumblr, to call for the vote to be canceled. Problem is, Joan, do you think any of this is actually going to matter?
It seems like generally this is like a juggernaut that cannot be stopped, that the FCC is going to hold this vote, and we know how the vote's going to go. And so the questions that remain are what happens next after that vote happens.
Right, exactly, which is, do you have any predictions as far as what could actually happen? I mean, net neutrality has only been around since 2015.
This incarnation of it, yeah. Well, right after the vote, nothing's going to change immediately. There's a process that has to go into effect where it has to become official, and that takes time. But the worry is that will change how internet service providers approach the traffic that you are trying to access through their services. The other thing that people are expecting definitely to happen is lawsuits to be filed. So even if the vote does go the way that we expect it to go on Thursday, there's still chances in the courts to change things that way.
Which will definitely slow things down even more. In the meantime, obviously consumers are definitely concerned that cost of their internet could actually go up. Some of their websites could get slowed down. So it's obviously understandable that all these protests are happening.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I agree. It's still a very big question mark as far as what might actually happen after this vote goes through. Next up, Google is now selling a $400 smart speaker with really good audio called the Google Home Max. It will compete against the Sonos One and Apple's HomePod, which is delayed to next year. Would you buy a $400 smart speaker?
I wouldn't, but I'm curious what kind of consumer, what kind of person does this make sense for? Do you know?
I mean, like we always mention, like for something this expensive for a smart speaker, especially because it can pair together. So you wouldn't just buy one for $400. Maybe you buy two for $800. Obviously, this is somebody that is like really into music and audiophile. And I don't know, like for me, I'd prefer to spend $30 to get an Echo Dot or a Google Home Mini, and that's why those products also exist.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious if you think that the different kind of tactics going for the very cheap mass market thing versus that very high end. What's the strategy of having both of those? Why have that high end offering?
Just like try to sell as much stuff as possible for sure. And I think the very cheap has obviously shown to be working as best as possible. The Echo Dot is Amazon's best selling Echo, and that's why the Google Home Mini exists. The big question too would be, is Apple going to get into that game and start selling a super cheap smart speaker? It like goes against everything we know about Apple.
Yeah.
But I think people would be really excited if they had some like really cute, slick looking smart speaker, the HomePod Junior or something. I don't know. Last, speaking of Apple agreed to buy Shazam, the music recognition app. Why would they need Shazam? Why did this purchase go through?
Well, they haven't said exactly the reason why. Apple is always hush-hush about its takeovers, and this one was unique in that they actually acknowledged that they bought it. But they did say that they're excited to start integrating Shazam into Apple Music, their streaming service that's very similar to Spotify. Some of the reasons could be obviously that kind of music recognition. Shazam has lots of users doing lots of music recognition over many years. And so they have a lot of data about what people like and what they don't like. And that can help Apple Music with recommendations.
Yeah. So customers can look forward to that and see more of that in Apple Music. If you want to read more about these stories, check us out on CNET. I'm Ben Fox Rubin.
I'm Joan Solsman.
Thanks for listening.
All right, everybody, thanks for joining us for the podcast recording portion. I'm going to go ahead and delve into the chat, dig out any of your best questions and comments to keep the conversation going here on the 359 podcast, even though they're well past 3 minutes and 59 seconds.
What? We did like maybe 20 seconds over.
I'm counting that we had started with a pre-show, and then there's a show, and then
Okay,
a
fair
post-show,
enough.
and this little 4-minute audio podcast has gotten way too complicated.
This is
and
an
convoluted.
hour-long podcast
Yes.
now. This is taking over my life. Okay, I want to ask Joan a quick question related to the Shazam thing. Okay, so if all Apple is doing is integrating Shazam's service into Apple Music, I mean, like, a lot of people already have the standalone app, so what's the point? You know, you're and couldn't they have just done a partnership with Shazam?
They have done partnerships with Shazam. Like Siri, you can already ask Siri to Shazam something. You don't have to open the Shazam app itself. You can ask Siri to do it for you. So they've already done partnerships like that. So it's definitely not just for their technology, this takeover, because Shazam has been willing to let them use their technology natively inside things like Siri before. I think it really is about having all that data, having so many users. It still has lots of active users. People are always Shazamming stuff.
What was the number that you mentioned to me yesterday?
The number that I saw yesterday was something like 160 million monthly active users.
A lot.
But that was 2 years ago. But no matter what, that's a lot, even though it was a couple years ago. And it's hard to say where it's gone from there. It's still a lot of people using a service. And it's a lot of people sending signals about what they like and what they don't like. With music, music discovery is the thing that really differentiates these services from one another, is that they can give you music that you're going to like without very much effort. And so in that way, it's a competitive move against Spotify.
Do you think that this is a way for Apple to try to, compete more effectively against Spotify because maybe they're losing against them? I don't actually know. I'm assuming that Spotify is the more popular service, but
Spotify by far has more subscribers than Apple Music, and Spotify by far has more users because, unlike Apple Music, Spotify has that free option where you can listen with ads instead of having to pay directly. Apple Music doesn't have that, so. But in terms of like an apples to apples comparison, Spotify has a lot more. I didn't even mean to pun. In terms of an apples to apples comparison of Apple, to Spotify, pure subscribers, Apple has, I think the last count that I saw, Apple has like 30 million and Spotify has like 60 million. They're both growing. It's definitely like a 2-horse race in terms of subscription music services. Apple and Spotify are the biggest, and they're definitely both growing well. But Spotify is bigger, and I think growing at a bigger pace.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure a lot of people tuned in to hear a conversation also about net neutrality. So maybe we should get to those questions.
Sure. Let's go ahead and start off with the question from our old friend Matthew Datcher, the Datch in the chat. What happens in a post-net neutrality world if we use a VPN to access the internet? How will that be impacted?
Well, I don't know exactly.
See that changing.
But I don't think that would really matter.
Would they be able to put into effect some effort to try to police that, though?
To police whether or not you can use a VPN?
A lot of people use VPN for less than admirable reasons to try to
business
tracks
or business reasons.
Very true. I'm not saying it's an
CBS
absolute...
Interactive uses VPNs all the time for protective business purposes as well.
Very true. But
that's totally accurate, I'm sure.
Would they be able to further regulate it, though, and set some kind of precedent for the people who are using it to cover tracks?
One of the things about the net neutrality proposal is that the FCC wants to offload the responsibility of this kind of regulation to the
FTC.
Federal Trade Commission, right? FTC.
Correct.
And so if it's a matter of asking whether there could be new regulation over VPNs, it sounds like, as you would imagine from a Republican administration, the general principle is like, we don't want more regulation, we want less.
Yes.
So in terms of, in practice, what ISPs would do around VPNs, I don't really know, because it's not the main concern about a net neutrality, a change in net neutrality regulations.
Right. I agree with everything you said. The bigger issues related to net neutrality, as far as I can tell, are there going to be fast lanes? Are ISPs going to be picking and choosing winners on the internet?
And that would affect traffic that's going over a VPN as much as it would people that don't bother to use a VPN. So it would affect people using VPNs and people not. Because it's a higher level of control over the bits and bytes that are coming to your computers.
Yes, the apples to apples.
So let's get a bit of a counter argument, as by and large, a lot of people are in favor of net neutrality, at least present company included. John Doe is pushing a bit of a conspiracy. Do you really think it's
we like conspiracy theories here?
But it sparks a really great conversation. So do you really think it's a coincidence that the largest companies in the world are pushing for net neutrality when they're the ones who benefit from free streaming? They can't charge for data. If people had to pay for 4K streaming, they wouldn't. I don't know if that's necessarily true anymore, at least in the coming years, as 4K becomes the norm.
That's not a conspiracy. That's totally
no.
legit.
The first part was like, do you really think they're not behind this kind of... Anyway, Netflix wants everyone to pay a flat rate in order to subsidize their own service.
I don't see anything wrong with what John Doe just said.
I didn't say there was anything wrong with it. I said it sparked a good conversation, and it is a little bit counter to the norm of the conversation we're having.
No, totally. And I feel like I've made a very similar argument on this podcast several times related to that. I think that Google, Netflix have a vested interest in maintaining net neutrality to preserve their bottom line and push those costs onto the backs of ISPs. These are all multi-billion-dollar companies, so I guess I shouldn't feel bad for anybody.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it is a matter of fairness. And if Netflix is getting away with not having to pay for this infrastructure and forcing it on somebody else, is that appropriate? And do the ISPs actually have a legitimate argument? I don't think anybody generally agrees with that position except for John Doe, but that's okay. It's an interesting conversation to have. Certainly, I think a lot of people are concerned that this is going to have vast changes for the internet. But as you said before, Joan, anything that does change is probably going to be very slow, particularly if there are going to be lawsuits.
What's interesting to see is just how much people are fired up about this topic, considering it can be hard to understand. And it's hard to understand in terms of the technical aspects of it, but also the regulatory aspects. So it's interesting to see that people are really fired up about this subject matter. And that definitely, I think, guarantees that it's something that's not going to be, it's not going to go, however this vote goes, it's not going to be going down without a fight.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is, the reason it got so heated is because it got directly connected to how the internet is structured. And obviously a lot of people have a very vested interest in making sure the internet stays open and available to people. They don't want to have a la carte services for the internet where it gets sliced and diced and divvied up. They don't want their costs going up. And then beyond that, there have been a lot of arguments about that this is a threat to democracy, that it could cause internet censorship. I obviously understand every single one of those points, but at the same time, does that mean that this regulatory regime is the best one for the internet? And obviously, the current FCC doesn't think that it is, and they're the ones that are in power to decide that.
Well, so. I think if anything's getting proven right now is that nobody really knows absolutely 100% what is the best solution for this anomaly that is the internet. We've seen it in the past with FM radio supplanting AM radio. We've seen cable TV kind of take a nosedive. Nobody really knows how to properly distribute information and data. They're going to continue to throw stuff at the wall until something sticks, and in the meantime, we're along for the ride. I think the one thing to take...
I think a lot of these distribution platforms have been they've been sticking pretty well when they're the dominant one.
I think by the nature of
90% of the American population has cable TV. Like that's a lot.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Wow.
But cord cutting is on the rise.
Yeah, like it's now like 88% instead of like 90%, which is big because it's the entire country.
I'm not saying we've completely 180'd on the entire thing, but I think what I'm trying to enforce here is that with media and consumption and the way it's supposed to kind of follow and shape the world all at the same time, there is no absolute solution. It's going to continue to change. That is the nature, and I think that's what we need to be ready for is, it's safe to say, could prices change with the repeal of net neutrality? Yeah. Will they? We don't know.
Right.
But I think something is going to change. The status quo is going to shift somehow. We need to be ready. We need to be on our toes because this is a big thing for those of us working in the media.
From the perspective of the FCC, I think a lot of the arguments really get pushed toward proponents of net neutrality. Just to kind of take a talking point from Ajit Pai, the chairman of the FCC, he argues that from a position of censorship, he claims that Twitter is a bigger issue for censor on the internet than potentially change in regulations or
I never thought I'd
deregulating.
agree with him, but I do to an extent.
I mean, his argument is also somewhat political in nature, where he said that Twitter has an agenda. I can't remember exactly. It's essentially a left-leaning agenda, and goes against other positions that don't actually follow that agenda.
Sure, but Twitter's also riding on the coattails of his boss.
That's another point. I think the other issue there, to go against what Ajit Pai had said, is that Twitter is one private company, whereas the idea of regulation from the government is a much broader issue.
Okay, back into the questions. Let's start a new conversation. MP Cody, my opinion is that the U.S. should repeal net neutrality, but allow each state to make their own laws on it. And I think that's largely what we're going to see happen. I think that's kind of the goal of the conservative movement. Some areas may not be affected by it, but some will. Expanding on that, all the cell phone carriers already charge extra for HD, and some don't even allow 4K, and the ones that do charge for it. Honestly, net neutrality is an unenforced joke the way it is now. Harsh words, but there's definitely points to be had there.
I don't know what that would actually do if you push net neutrality back to the states, and it would be like state by state internet.
Yeah, I don't know.
I just think that's
What would that even look like?
I mean, I think that's a sentiment that is shared amongst the Republican Party, that that's the way things should be run, is a state-to-state regulation or lack thereof, however that works. I mean, isn't that kind of like the MO of the Republican Party?
Generally, with some things, but then with other things, not.
Yeah. And going back to like a point that Roger continually makes about, the Republican versus Democrat administrations, if and when a Democrat ends up taking over the White House and therefore can appoint FCC commissioners, does that just mean that the net neutrality is going to get brought back?
Ping pong back and forth.
Which is like a crazy and certainly problematic situation. You start to wonder if maybe Congress should step in and actually do something about it.
Yeah, and so the story that I wrote yesterday about this group of about 20 internet pioneers who sent an open letter, that's what they're doing, is they're writing to Congress, to lawmakers, and saying specifically here, you need to step in and tell the FCC not to have this vote, or specifically, they were talking specifically around this vote that's coming up. But generally, that's the idea, is that, we haven't had legislation about how the internet works in a really long time, and the internet's changed a lot in that period. So I don't know. And then, but if you're putting your hopes on Congress getting anything done, especially something so complicated, then
I totally agree.
Yeah.
That's in some ways they would probably prefer unelected bureaucrats to have to
deal with
wrench with this whole situation, then have to go back to their constituency and say I took this position or that position. So there's a lot of politics involved in this, and it'll probably continue to be that case.
I just want to shout out to Doug Murray. Yes, the microphones are sitting on my old 8-track tapes from a personal collection. One is from Doc Stevenson.
Yeah.
Jones is a polka beer festival.
Oh, how appropriate. I married a Polish man, so it's good that I have
We did it
polka
on
beer
purpose.
festival.
So just to lighten things up for a little bit.
They're all themed.
Meanwhile, question for Joan from Michael Brown.
Yes,
When
Mr.
could we
Michael.
expect the net neutrality effects to actually happen?
So the answer is I don't know. If you want, so Maggie Reardon is Marguerite Reardon, as our byline goes. She is our go-to person on all things net neutrality. She has a lot of coverage on CNET, and she's been covering this really well for decades. She's a legit expert on it. So my first recommendation is go to CNET and see some of Maggie's stories. But from what I've read of her stories is a lot of it depends on how companies, once the dust settles in terms of the regulations are put in place, the vote's done, regulations are put in place, lawsuits spring up, whatever. Once that kind of dust settles, it depends on what ISPs want to do. Like in 2015, when the previous FCC made the change to the current regulations, there was a lot of hue and cry about how this would stifle innovation and blah, blah, blah. But what I've heard from Maggie is that there actually hasn't been like that much change or burden on companies. And they haven't there's no evidence that investment in innovation has been decreased in any way or whatever. So a lot of it kind of depends on what those monolithic companies that deliver your internet to you decide they want to do, because they have the ability to play around with more tools on your traffic if there's less regulation on them, or different regulation on them.
And from an infrastructure perspective, that kind of thing moves very slowly.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But from if they're innovating in terms of services that they can provide people, if they there's the issue of paid prioritization. I don't think it takes very much for them to say, Netflix, you have to pay us some money if you want your
4K
all your
streams
moves,
to go faster.
to go in a fast lane. I think that kind of innovation, where they're innovating on how they charge people, I think that can happen pretty quickly if they decide that's what they want to go. But they have to deal with what consumers. I mean, obviously, consumers are very riled up about this issue. They have to deal with the fact that consumers might vote with their wallet and be like, but that's the other problem, is that,
where would they go?
Where do you go? Usually there's only one or maybe two, if you're lucky,
from
games in town.
So you cover Netflix. From your perspective, Netflix very routinely increases their subscription prices. Do you think that their next subscription increase they could blame on the ISPs?
Could. I mean, they could. They might, but ultimately, if it's the same, when there was the debate around net neutrality in 2015, Netflix was very outspoken about it. Less so this time. But one of the reasons that I remember when we were talking about at that round of net neutrality discussions, they raised that prospect of how it could raise prices for your content. But ultimately, the reason your Netflix subscription is getting more expensive is because Netflix is spending billions of dollars on content, not because they might get pennies in comparison increase in getting it delivered to you,
which I think is very important context.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of noise that's being directed at consumers from all of these companies. They all want to present themselves as being on the side of the consumer, and hopefully what we can do here in a very small extent is to at least educate people and provide them with a little bit more information as far as what's going on.
All right, we are running super low on time, and there are a ton of really good questions and fantastic conversation happening in the chat.
Round?
As always, we should do a lightning
round.
Lightning round.
So for Pele and Scott Maya, how is net neutrality going to affect people in Europe as well as other places in the world? There are a lot of social media and streaming services from the U.S. What impact are we going to see globally?
That's a really hard one to say. I've mentioned in previous podcasts that because the U.S. is the U.S., oftentimes their regulatory position is taken up or considered by other countries. So that could, end up having an impact on Europe in that case. I don't actually know if Facebook or YouTube are impacted by net neutrality in some ways, how that would impact European consumers, because some of those videos are based in servers in Europe. So that's under a different regime. So it's a hard question to answer.
I think in this case, net neutrality is a pretty localized effect, because your ISP, it's very localized getting your traffic. It comes to a server near you and then goes to your house. And ultimately, net neutrality regulations are on those people that are providing it right in your neighborhood. But there could be, like you said, kind of like echo effects on how does that affect Netflix, and then how does that affect what Netflix invests in, and how does that affect what Netflix can send to Europe and distribute there. It could have echo effects, but I don't think directly Europeans will be, or people in other countries would be affected by the vote.
All right, moving on. Michael Brown, let's change directions here. Do you think the Shazam acquisition by Apple has something to do with the Pixel 2's music recognition built in?
It might.
Also, Michael, aren't you at the spa? Why are you watching this show?
He is at the spa.
He is at the spa.
Cheers.
Cheers to you for your soon birthday, I think. Sorry, I saw that on Twitter. I'm not super creepy, okay, guys?
Well, you are super creepy, but
fine.
Maybe in this
Just
instance,
remember,
you can defend yourself that it's not creepy.
If you watch this show, Ben will find you.
We follow each other on Twitter. Why did I say that out loud? Anyway, happy birthday, I think, Michael. And thank you for the question, as always.
The question was...
Do you think the Shazam acquisition has anything to do with Pixel 2's music recognition being built in?
That's a really good premise. It's a really good insight. I hadn't thought about that, but the iPhone is the golden ticket for Apple still. It's a thing where they make all their money. So anything that makes their iPhone more competitive against an upsurging competitor or an upsurging rival is definitely tantamount in Tim Cook's mind.
Absolutely.
And the last question for the day, because we are clean out of time. Danny Green, is there anything in Shazam that can boost Siri, i.e. sound detection, to help you find music or movies that you might like? That would be a neat thought.
Yeah.
That's
sure.
That's a possibility. I mean, we talked about on the podcast itself about how Apple and Siri have already partnered with Shazam so that you can directly ask Siri to Shazam something and hear it. But if you have, if it's not a partnership, if it's just kind of like inextractably, if they're all connected, inextricably intertwined, then feasibly that means it could work better.
Oh man, I want to say those words 5 times fast. Inextricably
we'll say
intertwined.
That for offline when the mics are no longer on. We won't make you listen to Ben say tongue twisters of weird words over and over again.
Fine, while I comment about Michael Brown.
So we are out of time, but we do want to remind folks that this is our last regular broadcast week of 2017. Final show being on Thursday, and this coming Thursday, we will be going live just a little bit early to make way for another live CNET show that day. So we'll probably be on somewhere around 10:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time this coming Thursday, the 14th. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then we'll have a couple of filler shows up on YouTube live stream as well as audio podcast to kind of get you through the holiday season, and then we'll be back in January starting at CES, and then general regular resume schedule TBD, but stay tuned on Twitter.
Asterisk, as net neutrality will allow.
In the new regime.
We are out of time though. Who wants to bring us home?
I'll do it, I think. The 359 podcast is available on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, FeedBurner, Google Play Music, the Amazon Echo, and of course, CNET.com. Thanks everybody for watching. Great questions. We'll see you again tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.